from the creators of War Room.
You need to do your fighting in prayer.
On August 23rd, the Kendrick brothers return to the big screen with Overcomer.
Why have a season with one runner?
One runner matters.
John Harrison is a frustrated coach questioning his value until he crosses paths with a student struggling on her own journey.
What have you allowed to define you? When you find your identity in the one who created you, it'll change your whole perspective.
Overcomer. In theaters August 23rd, starring Alex Kendrick, Priscilla Shirer, and Sherry Rigby. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. For tickets and showtimes, visit overcomermovie.com.
Is that?
That's Hannah.
Run, Hannah!
Just thinking about teaching with humor makes me smile. I stumbled across this recently when I tried this technique firsthand, and guess what? It worked. I can't wait to share the details with you.
This is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network. Welcome to the Vintage Homeschool Moms Show. Your host, Felice Gerwitz, is an author, a publisher, and your radio show host. She will encourage, educate, and inspire you with answers to your most pressing questions, from homeschool, marriage, parenting, and much more. Felice loves to equip moms to live a Christian life because every moment counts. Be sure to visit her website at mediaangels.com. And here's your host, Felice Gerwitz.
Hey everyone, and welcome. This is Felice Gerwitz with Vintage Homeschool Moms. Today we are going to talk about teaching with humor. This is episode 360, and you can find the show notes at vintagehomeschoolmoms.com. I want to thank our sponsor, and that is Overcomer the Movie. You can find out more information at overcomermovie.com. You can watch the trailer on this website, as well as get some great resources like a study guide that goes along with the movie for your kids. All right, well, I can't wait to start this episode, and I want to dive right in. You know, we all love to laugh, and often we read things on social media that are so funny. We share them with our friends and, kind of giggle about it all day long. Well, laughter makes us happy. It reduces stress. And really, laughter goes across all cultures. All over the world, we know that people laugh. We know that babies laugh even before they can speak. And truthfully, laughter is a form of communication. Research shows that laughter increases blood flow, decreases stress, triggers endorphins, and promotes well-being. I'm sure it does a lot more than just those things, but these are the ones that apply the most to us. The use of humor in an education setting is beneficial, and I found this out the other day. I was working on a reading program, and one of my students, aka grandson, was becoming stressed. It was getting more difficult for him to do the work, and we were getting right under that frustration level. And for those of you that teach your kids at home, when your child is getting frustrated, you kind of want to dial back, but you want to kind of push up to that level, because that's when the processing really takes place, and your kids are making those neuro-pathways, and they are going to remember that. But that process itself can be stressful for your kids. Well, when I was working with my grandson, he was not really liking any of it. And he kind of came in that day with a bad attitude. And so I said to him, you know what? Let's tell each other jokes. And he goes, really? And I said, yeah. And he goes, do you know any jokes? And I said, well, I'm not the best at telling jokes, but I'll tell you the few that I know. And so one of them was, what time is it when the elephant sits on a fence? And he kind of looked at me, and I said, time for a new fence, and he kind of laughed, and I kind of giggled. And then I told him another joke, and I said, "Why did the man throw the clock out the window?" And he kind of looked at me, and I said, "To see time fly." And then he kind of laughed as well. And it was wonderful, and he began telling me jokes, and we laughed, and we went back to our work, and then we were able to get a bunch done. While we were pushing it right under my grandson's frustration level in order to create new neuro-pathways, we were also trying to get him past an area where he was struggling, especially in the specific area. We don't want the kids frustrated, so it has to be underneath this frustration level before a child says that it's too hard. But truthfully, humor works. It really does. And telling jokes or teaching using humor anecdotes does encourage healthy learning, and it does encourage a healthy learning environment. While humor in and of itself does not cause learning, it does affect the brain. And it causes the brain to fire up and get ready for learning. And you may not be a comedian, and very rarely do our own kids think we're funny, but we can use humor as a tool. And even if our kids don't think we're funny, guess what? They think they're funny. So you may have them come prepared to tell some jokes. We use humor as a tool in learning. The first is to get our kids' attention. Sometimes they start wandering. Maybe you've been reading too long, or they're, just out in space somewhere. They're not concentrating. So you can use humor in a way to get their attention back. You can use humor to diffuse a bad behavior. If they're, I use sarcasm a lot, which is not always a good thing. But if you see that your kids are getting ready to do something, you may want to step in and use some humor there. Humor helps to get their neurons to fire up. It really does work. Humor helps to pave the way to learn difficult subjects. We use humor to make learning fun. I had a friend that used to say that learning should not be fun, and that was one of her pet peeves. She couldn't stand when people said learning was fun. So I would remind her that my first book was Teaching Science and Having Fun. And I said, it's not an oxymoron. It really is true. And we used science a lot in our homes, especially with my oldest son, who had some learning delays. And science was one of the ways that I was able to circumvent some of those more difficult subjects. And we were able to bring in reading, bring in critical thinking skills, bring in vocabulary, and do so much with hands-on. So for us, that made science fun. So it can, in general, make learning fun. The sixth way is it encourages your child to participate, whether they're the ones telling the jokes as well, but it's going to teach them to be able to participate in class. A lot of times, parents will say, well, I'll ask my kids a question and they'll say nothing else, or they won't answer. I had a son that I would ask him a question, and he would ask his sister to answer it for him. It was so funny. Of course, I didn't think it was quite as humorous back then, and when I'm trying to have this control on my little classroom. But the idea is that it will encourage the kids to participate and to answer questions. It also helps the kids to remember the information because they've just been laughing, right? So they've gotten, some of those kinks out. And so it's time, to get back to work, and it will help them remember because their brain is now firing up. It helps to soothe anxiety. If a child has difficulty with the subject, like it did with my grandson, it helped him to laugh, and then we were able to go back and to, get back to the learning. And then, another thing is humor causes relaxation, and that's a big, big help. And also, it increases the blood flow. And so when we are increasing that blood flow to our brains, what happens? Well, everything is going to be just working so much better because our brains are going to be infused and our hearts are pumping and everything. And so, we're going to be ready to get that learning going. Humor is a good tool for laying the groundwork of learning. It is not, a substitute. And obviously, unless you're really good at getting your kids to laugh the whole day, then it's not necessarily a tool for learning, but it is a tool to encourage learning. I remember having this huge graph, and in this graph, it had a story about punctuation, and I still have it, and every once in a while it surfaces in the house, and I had laminated it. Was in the newspaper, and I had laminated it and used it as a classroom tool. And it was a story about punctuation and how there was, one of the punctuation marks was a king and queen. And it was written in such a way that it was so entertaining and hilarious. And in that way, that story that was told humorously enabled the children to remember what the different parts of punctuation were and what they did. I'll have to find it and do another podcast on that someday. But anyway, it's important that we find things that make not only the kids laugh, but ourselves as well. You can use the kids' names in a book you're reading. Switch out the characters' names with your children and watch them sit up and listen. That's another effective tool. Another one is when you're writing things out. So I would sometimes write different worksheets for my kids. If I was using, let's say, some science vocabulary that I couldn't find any vocabulary sheets on, and I would write sentences that had to do with the kids or something that they liked, and then I would have them come up and answer the question. So these are different techniques that can be used that are humorous because the kids are going to laugh, when they see you switching out characters' names or using their names in sentences or in worksheets that you create for them. They are going to be really engaged and want to do the work. Also, you can set up a Pinterest board if you use Pinterest, like most of us do, and, find some funny memes, look them up, and put them in there. And then you can also search for some funny kid videos that you can watch. Of course, you're going to watch them first before you allow your children to watch them. And it was so funny because just the other day I saw a meme, and this was more for me than for the kids, but the kids thought it was really funny, especially one of my grandkids who keeps wanting me to set up her Etsy store. And we have set it up, and she's working on it. It's not, out in the public yet. But the little meme read, "Moms texting each other," and said, "Mom number 1, I'm done. I'm selling the kid on eBay. Mom number 2, don't be crazy. You made him. That goes on Etsy." So very humorous, and especially for those who, are crafters or, just think that kind of thing is funny. Of course, we're not going to sell our kids, so don't get hyped up. But, we can look at humor as a way of engaging our kids, getting them back in focus, and for the real learning to take place afterwards. You're not going to use humor all the time because if you did, it would not be effective. But friends, I am telling you, humor does work. I saw this happen in my own life recently, and I wanted to share it with you. As we kick off this series, this entire month is going to be about teaching. I did a podcast previously that was called All About Teaching, and giving you some teaching tips that has helped me through my years of homeschooling. I have been a homeschool mom since, since the dinosaurs roamed the earth in 1986. So I'm dating myself there. But again, this entire month is going to be about teaching different teaching techniques, and I have some really special guests that I've lined up to share with you some of their insider tips on teaching. So I hope you enjoy this episode. I hope that it has helped you in your journey of home education. You can find the show notes again at vintagehomeschoolmoms.com. Look for episode 360, Teaching with Humor. Until we meet again, God bless, and we'll talk to you soon. And don't forget to go like us on, give us a rating on your favorite podcast app, and also share this episode with a friend.
Thanks for tuning in to the Vintage Homeschool Mom Show. Visit Felice at MediaAngels.com and TheVintageHomeschoolMoms.com. Vintage Homeschool Moms is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network.